G'day there, you're watching the Aussie BIM Guru, and today we're starting a new series on the channel, which is building door families. So today, in part 1, we're going to be looking specifically at door frames. I'd like to thank Wojciech for this request. He's actually been on the channel since very early days, and he's been requesting these types of tutorials for quite a while, and it has taken me a while to get to them. So I'd like to thank him for his patience and his persistence, and hopefully these help you, Wojciech, and other people out there. I believe he's from Scotland, I think so. So the goal of this series is to show you how to build families well, in this case in the context of Revit door families. So we're going to explore nesting in particular, especially in this first part. I'm also just going to show you some ways you can add features and details to your door families that maybe you hadn't thought of or weren't able to do so before. So for those not aware, I actually do sell my own doors that I've built in the background for my business on my website, so feel free to check those out if you're interested. So the running order of the series is in part 1, we're going to look at frames. Part 2, we're going to look at adding a hinge set to the frame. And we're going to explore the concept of angled parameters, because we're going to make it so the leaf and the hinges can be opened, which is quite challenging, but it's worthwhile. In part 3, we're going to look at the leaf itself, so we're going to make sure the leaf can be opened as well, and we're going to show you how to nest the leaf. Part 4, we're just going to show you how to place some hardware on the door as well, so in this case probably a door handle and a panic bar. And in part 5, we'll look at some nested panels inside the door itself, so vision panels and grills and all sorts of accessories. But today we're just focusing on frames. So our goals today is we want to build a parametric door frame to start off our door family. It's usually the best thing to build first because it sort of sets out all the other pieces of the door. It's hard to set out a leaf if you don't have a frame. So we're going to be trying to build it so that it has a double single rebate option that's really easy to swap between. We're going to make it so it's fully parametric, so every aspect of the frame can be adjusted, and it also reacts to things like the thickness of the leaf changing, for example. We're also going to make it so that the door frame understands the thickness of its host wall, and it's going to be a nested family, so this isn't as easy as it sounds. We're then going to add some controls so that you can offset the face of the door off the face of the wall, because sometimes you may need your frame to be deeper than its host wall. For example, if you have a brick wall with a stud wall next to it, you might want your door frame to be a bit wider than the wall that it's hosted to, which is the brick. As well as that, we're going to add some future parameters that will support the hinge set as well, like a little offset inside the frame to fit the hinge set. So let's get started. So I'm going to be using Revit 2020, and I'm going to be using build 2.2.1 in this case, or 2020.2.1. So I'm just going to open up Revit, and I'm going to get started. So I'm just in an empty project at the moment, nothing special. I'm going to start by creating a profile family. So I'm just going to go new, I'll go new and I'll hover over new family. And in this case, I'm just going to go down to profile. And in this case, it doesn't really matter what type of profile we're using. I'm just going to use generic in this case. And I'm going to start building my door frame. So in this case, this is going to be the inside face of the wall. And this is going to be the side where the door leaf is sitting on. So I'm going to start setting up some reference planes. So up here on create, I'm just going to start creating reference planes. And in this case, I'm going to need to create a few things. The first thing is I need to create my jam zone. So I'm just going to create two reference planes and just mirror them. I'm then going to create my wall face and then my trim. So my trim is going to be a little bit off the wall face. And I'm just going to keep mirroring these. And we'll start adding some parameters shortly. As well as that, I also need to add some additional references too. So I'm going to create my trim zone, so how far my trim sits back from the face of the wall that the frame sits against. And then I'm just going to create, as well as this, the width of my frame. And then I'm just going to create a little setback, just of 3 mil, just to fit the hinge. And don't worry about the dimensions of what we're setting up right now. Just make sure it's all sort of spatially in a similar location to what I'm doing, because we're going to add parameters to this after. I always find it's easier just to pretty arbitrarily draw these things, and then we set parameters after. But what's important is that these two planes are at the origin of our door frame. So what I'm going to do now is just literally start drawing my door frame. And what I like to do is just draw it roughly, like almost next to the reference planes, and then I can just constrain it after. So I'm just drawing around here, and you'll start to see the shape of the door frame sort of emerge eventually. And you'll probably understand what we're drawing now. So we're drawing a double rebate door frame. I'm going to use the align tool. And I'm just going to start picking the reference planes and the lines. And so I'm just aligning them one at a time. In this case, I'm going to align to the offset because we're going to fit our hinge in this zone, and our leaf is going to start on that reference plane. I'm just setting this all up, and you could do the dimensions first. It doesn't really matter. In this case, I'm just doing this way instead. Just line this up, and at this point, we should pretty much be done. Okay, so now we can start setting up some major parameters to drive this thing. So what I like to do first is typically set the smaller references. So I might just go down to 1 to 2, so it's a bit easier to see what I'm doing. And in this case, I'm just going to create firstly this end here. And in this case, I'm just going to call this the trim projection. So I'll call this the trim projection in the vertical direction, or V. I'm going to make it a type-based parameter because we're in a profile right now, and profiles, when they're nested, you can only associate type parameters to them. You'll see what I mean when we actually open up the door frame family that we're going to build itself, because we're going to use this in a sweep to build a frame family itself. Okay, so I'm just also going to set this parameter here, and I'm going to call this one trim projection H, or horizontal. Make that type-based. I'm then going to set this parameter, so to the outer reference, and then I'm just going to make a little dimension here. So this one here is going to be, in this case, the hinge gap, I'll call that. So that's the gap the hinge sits in. And this is our frame width, including the hinge gap. And then I need to set up a few more parameters. So in this case, I'm going to be setting up these two here. So these are going to be my door throat parameters. So this is the throat of the door. The wall faces are going to be here. So in this case, I'm just going to call this one here throat E for throat external. And I'm going to call this one throat I for throat internal. It's good to name these pretty clearly so that you remember what they are when you actually need to go back and constrain all these things quite shortly. As well as this, I'm just going to set up 2 dimensions here, one there and one there. And these are going to be my door rebate. I'm going to make them equal. You could make them different, but I find usually the rebates are equal in most doors because the leaf widths are basically reversible. So in this case, I'm just going to make that one parameter. So now we can just go and actually set these parameters manually. Much easier. So I'm just going to make my rebate, in this case, 40. I'll make my frame width 40. I'll make my hinge gap 3. In this case, I'll just make my throat offset 50 in both directions. I'll project my trim, in this case, in the horizontal direction by 10, and I'll project it vertically by 12. And you can see now we get pretty much a parametric frame that's all centered around these 2 reference planes, which is where the wall's going to be. So at this point, I can pretty much just name this. I'll just give it a type name. So I'll just go new, and I'm just going to call this double rebate. And that's pretty much all you have to worry about. Now, what I like to do as well when I'm using an Autodesk template is I like to go to fill patterns and just delete all these Autodesk fill patterns, because otherwise they come into your project. And most of my templates I use, they don't use the Autodesk defaults. So as well as that, I like to go to materials and just quickly clear these out. I usually use a dynamo script to do this instead, but I guess in this case, I'm just showing you the manual way. And then I just like to purge. Then we can just go to visibility graphics, turn off annotation categories, and we have a nice little thumbnail preview as well. Now I can just go save as, and I'm just going to save my profile family. So I'm just going to go to desktop, demonstration, profiles. Usually when I name a profile family, I start with, this type selector is so annoying. I found this type selector loves popping up when you're building families in Revit 2020. Don't know why. I usually prefix my families with BG, then I put the category as 3 letters. For profiles, I use PRF. And then after that, just what is it? So in this case, I'm going to say it's door frame, double rebate. Hopefully I can get this type selector to go away. I'm also just going to basically resource this into a single rebate as well. So I'm just going to save it again. And all I have to do is just delete that, trim, turn my annotation categories back on, and just delete this door rebate on the other side. And I've really quickly just repurposed this into a single rebate door family. I'll just rename my type as well to single rebate. And we've pretty much done our first step. So we've created 2 door frame profiles. What we need to do now is create a door frame. But what I'm going to do first is I'm actually just going to go and create a new family that we're going to use in future tutorials. So I'm going to go new family. And I'm from the templates, I'm going to pick metric generic model. And all I'm going to do with this is just go to manage, and I'm just going to clean all these things out. Just so I don't have to keep doing this every time I make a new family. I do actually have a set of templates that I use for my company, but probably wouldn't teach you a lot if I use those. Just going to clear out the materials as well. Now you don't have to get rid of the line patterns. Some people find it quite tricky because you lose the dash pattern on the reference planes. I'm quite used to working this way, but I guess you don't have to get rid of the line patterns. It's up to you. I'm just going to purge everything that's left. So in this case, just all the material assets. And I'm going to make it a work plane based family. Most families I use are work plane based. They're much easier to control the height of. So I'm just going to save this as a family. And I'm just going to go up one level. And I'm just going to call this starter family. And I'll just make it an RFA. And also I'll just resave it every time. So now when I go to make my door frame, which I'm going to start off as a generic model, I can just go open family. And I can open that starter instead. So it saves me having to do that cleanup process. I can just go save as family, and in this case I'm going to save a frame, so I'm going to call this BG for BIM Guru. I'm going to say DOR for door. Now in this case I'm going to make a component family, so it's going to be nested, and it's not going to reach the project level. With these families I usually put a small c, just to represent that it's a component of the category. We're going to reassign its category as well. In this case I'm just going to call this door frame, and I'm going to call this double. We'll do the double rebate first. Oh, that type select is such a pain. All right, so we're going to get started. So we're going to make this the right reference plane of our door. So we're going to build our frame over here. You could center your frame, but sometimes the door won't really have a centered logic, like such as a door, a double door, or a cat and kitten door, or a door and a half, as some people call it. So in this case, I'm just going to draw one reference plane. So I'm using RP as my shortcut there. I'm just going to throw down a dimension. And in this case, I'm actually going to reassign my category right now to doors. So I'm going to go up to here and just set my category as doors. And now we're dealing with a door family that started from a generic model. So this is a way you can start a door family that isn't hosted to a wall. And in this case, the reason I'm using a door family is because I want it to belong to the category of doors in visibility graphics. As well as that, I want to assign an object style to the door so I can control it at a sub-level when it's nested into another family. So I'll show you how that works right at the end. In this case, I'm just going to use the standard width parameter, because when you change categories, some of the out-of-the-box parameters are introduced. So in this case, doors always have a width, a height, a rough width, a rough height, and a thickness. So these come in whether you like it or not, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do now is actually load one of my profiles. So I'm going to go load family, and in this case, I'm going to go and load from demo profiles, and I think there's a backup file there. I'll just delete that. So I'm going to load in this frame double rebate. Now at the moment we don't place down a profile, so what we do instead is we draw a sweep and we use a profile as the profile we sweep. So I'm going to go to front view and I'm just going to create another reference plane using RP. And in this case I'm just going to dimension down to the ref level, and I'm just going to make this the height. So in this case I can make this something like 2040. And I can make the width, say 920. That way it's a bit closer to a standard leaf size. Okay, so I'm just going to go to front view and I'm just going to draw a sweep. And currently I'm drawing on the reference plane that we were looking at in floor plan. So I'm going to use a pick line tool. And I'm just going to go pick, pick, pick. And I'm just going to trim those three lines together. And I'm just going to align the ends of these back. So now we have a sweep that's constrained to those reference planes, drawn on this plane. What I can do now is select profile, and currently I'm selecting the profile, and I can just assign my door frame profile. I may need to flip it, so in this case I'm just going to click on the profile is flipped option, and now you can see we've nested this profile successfully. So we don't have to worry about any really awkward reference plane constraints or constraining a parametric sweep. Nesting a profile is far easier. But how do we make this parametric? Well, that's another thing. So what we're going to do here first is we're going to make this a frame mullion category element. So this is why we've changed its category to doors, because now we can access that door object style. I'm going to nest a material. So I'm just going to call the material in this case finish. And I'm going to make this instance based so that we can change this on an instance by instance basis. Everything else you see here, we don't need to change. What we need to change is actually the profile settings themselves. So if we go to family, profiles, and we just expand this profile, if I right click on this type and go to type properties, we can actually nest type and instance-based parameters to the profile parameters themselves. Because profiles can't be shared, we can always nest into their type properties. So in this case, I'm just going to nest these properties. I'm going to nest store rebate. So I'm just basically setting new parameters at this level that we're working at. In this case, I'm going to make this, actually, I probably need to make that an instance-based parameter. I might. Looks like I've already made a type-based parameter. We'll change that after. As well as this, I'm going to make frame width. And we do want to make these instance-based, and you'll see why when we actually build the door. I'll add the hinge gap. So we're going to build a few different door frame types. Throw E. And at the moment, note, I'm not using any shared parameters. I'm just using just standard project or family parameters. But when we get to the door level, we will use some shared parameters. Now you don't have to make all these parameters parametric. If your trim projections are always the same, then maybe you don't need to change them. In this case, I'm just going to set them anyway. And we just need to remember to go back and fix that door rebate parameter and make it instance-based. So to do that, we can just go to type properties, find that door rebate, and just make it instance-based. Great. From here, I'm just going to make a new type, and I'll just call this double rebate. Make sure it's something that you can recognize the name of, because we are going to be picking this in the project itself. You'll see what I mean shortly. But at that point, we pretty much have what we need. Now, sometimes you might want to go into manage object styles and just fix these colors just by shift selecting and making them black, because otherwise you get that really ugly green default. I'm just going to line up my view cube up to the top, and I'm just going to save the orientation. And what I might do is also add a flip control to flip it this way, because we are going to have a single rebate eventually using the same family as its source. So we sometimes want to flip that single rebate side. So in this case, I'm just going to add a double vertical flip. But otherwise, we've pretty much got a family that's located on this point with a width, a height, and a parametric size. So what I'll do is just purge. Looks like there's nothing to purge. Great. I'm just going to go save as, and I'm just going to save this frame family as well under frames. Actually, I already have, so I'm going to do just a standard save. Now what I'm going to do is create a single rebate type, and I'm just going to do that by going save as, and in this case, I'm just going to rename double to single. And all I'm going to do is just reload from, and I'm just going to reload over the top of my double family with my single family. In this case, I won't override the parameter values. And what I'm going to do is just rename to copy that single rebate name, delete, rename, paste. And we've pretty much more or less just overwritten our double with our single rebate family. Now, because all those parameters had the same name, it's really important that that's the case, because what's happened is it's just recognized those matches, and it's kept those nesting relationships. So we don't have to go and reconstrain that family. We can see now that we have a single rebate profile being used instead. So you can see it's a little bit different. But we still don't have these in a door family, obviously. So that's the next step. So I'll just check the purge. Cool. Save. So now we're going to create a door. So I'm going to go to new, family. And I'm going to start with the door template instead. So just a reminder, I am going to go and just do a little bit of cleaning up first. So I'm going to get rid of all these fill patterns. And in this case, I might keep the hidden style just so you can see the reference planes. Okay, it's not using those. You can control the reference plane graphic under object styles, annotation categories, and then just toggle this over here. And now you can see the reference planes have updated. You can actually change the color of your reference planes too. I used to work with reference planes in blue, which used to make them a bit easier to see. So you can see sometimes that's easier to spot a reference plane. The only problem is that it's very similar to the selection color, so it doesn't always work. What I usually do is I just get rid of these trims as well, because they're pretty pointless. And I'm also just going to go in and delete these frame projection, external, internal, and frame width parameters, because we're going to use shared parameters instead. But we are going to keep everything else pretty much the same. So I'm actually going to go and add some shared parameters from my shared parameters file. So if you have this file from my website, great. If not, I'll sort of guide you as to what parameters they need to be. They don't have to be shared. You don't have to use shared parameters, but I like to use shared parameters in door families. So I'm going to make a new parameter. I'm just going to make a shared parameter, and I'm going to add a leaf width and a leaf height parameter. So in this case, I keep these under a group for dimensions for doors. So I'm in this case just going to add a dimension leaf width parameter, and I'm just going to make that type based. I'm also going to add a leaf height parameter. So in this case, the dimensions doors, leaf height. And I'm also going to add a frame width parameter. And we're going to use these three parameters to dictate the size of the door. So in this case, I just need to get my frame width type based. So in this case, I'm going to make my frame width 40, my leaf height 2040, and my leaf width 920. In this case, I'm going to just rearrange these a little bit, just to put width, height, and frame width in order. So in this case, we can actually use a formula to drive our width and our height. So our width is equal to our leaf width plus 2 frames. So we're going to copy that parameter name, and we're going to say plus, and we're just going to enclose with a bracket 2 times the frame width parameter. We can also say that the height is going to be leaf width, leaf height plus frame width, because we just have one frame at the top. So we've pretty much parametrically set up a relationship between all these things that set out our door family, which is our leaf and our frame typically. All we need now is actually our frame. So I'm going to insert, load family, and we're going to load in those 2 frames that we've built. So in this case, I'm just going to delete some of those backup files. Cool. So I'm just going to load in these 2 frames, and I'm just going to place one. So I'm going to go just component, place on work plane, and there's one of our door frames. Now you could flip the orientation if you wanted to, say we're always swinging out. Well, in that case, you'd want your single rebate to be pointing out. Now at the moment, there's no parameters currently assigned to anything. So we will need to actually update some of these. In this case, notice how we don't have width and height available. Now you could go and just change them in the type properties of the door frame here, but this isn't ideal because we actually need these to be instance based so that we can swap between different types of door frames and retain those values. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to go back to my door frames. And in this case, I'm just going to open my double rebate first. And this is a really handy little trick. If you ever have a system parameter, all you have to do is select it where you can see it, and you can actually toggle it to instance based here. Because a lot of people get stuck here, because if you go to the type properties, and let's say I want to change the width to instance based, it looks like you can't. It looks like it's locked down, but it's not. So I can actually just go and find it, select it, make it instance based here. So that's a really handy little trick. I'm just going to change that trim projection H to instance based as well while I'm here. Yeah, that's a really useful little trick, and most people don't seem to be aware of it. I'll just create the same in the single rebate. So we'll make that instance based. Same with the height. And I'll just go find that same parameter. Obviously, when you copy a family, you copy all the errors as well. Great. So now I can just reload. I can just reload those 2 door frames with those updates. And I'm just overriding the parameters as well. Great. So now I should be able to set some parameters here. So in this case, I'm going to create a shared parameter for the material of the frame. And we're nesting this into that parameter that we created. So I have a door material parameter section. In this case, I'm just going to use my frame material. And what I'm also going to do is just start nesting some parameters. So I'm going to nest my width. And that should associate the 2 things together. And then I'm going to nest my height. And also my frame width, which I've set here as a shared parameter. So if I do swap this to another type of door frame with the same parameters, note that these parameters, they stay the same. So this is really important because we're going to be essentially swapping between them. Note that this is a really easy way just to create a separate type of rebate without having to overcomplicate a family. So what I'm going to do in this case is associate a label parameter. So I'm going to come up to here with the frame selected, and I'm going to add a label parameter. And I'm just going to call this one frame type, and I'll make it instance based, and I'll just put it under the graphics tab. So the way this works is that now on an instance basis, I can actually toggle my frame type. So I can change this from single to double, and I can see that I can just update that on a really easy basis. So in a project, we're going to be able to manipulate that now. I'm also just going to align my door frame. So I'm going to line it up back here. Remember, the origin is in this corner, and I'm going to center it. Now we've got a problem at the moment. Our door frame's not meeting the width of our wall. So how do we make it associate to this? Because we can't use constraints because this is a nested family. So there's a little trick we can do here. So if we create a dimension to the face of the host wall in both sides, and then we associate a parameter to this. In this case, I'm going to call this, actually I'm going to use a shared parameter for host thickness. So in my general dimensions section, I just have a parameter called host thickness. And I use this for all sorts of host thicknesses. We need to make this instance-based and reporting. So the reporting parameter is now just going to report back on the thickness of that wall. But we can use this in formulas now. So what we can do is actually nest this parameter. So in this case, I can go to my, I need to make a formula in this case. So I am actually going to nest a couple of these parameters. So in this case, I need to create a formula to drive these. So I'm going to create this throat E parameter again on an instance basis. And I'm going to create this throat I parameter on an instance basis. So at the moment, this isn't connected to the thickness of our wall. We are going to fix that. Now I am just going to leave pretty much everything else except for the door rebate. I'm going to associate that to a parameter for the door leaf thickness. So I'm going to go to my dimensions for doors, and I'm just going to find my leaf thickness shared parameter, which is a dimension or a length. I'll make that a type-based parameter. Everything else for now, I'm just going to leave flexible. You could obviously make all these things parametric if you wanted to. In my case, it doesn't matter. What I'm going to do is just add 2 extra parameters. So I'm going to add a parameter for the offset that we want to push each side of the door frame off the face of the wall from. So I'm going to go to my dimensions for doors, and I have 2 special parameters I've built called throat offset E, which I'm going to make instance based, and throat offset I. And these are the actual dimensions we're going to use to push the door frame away from the wall. So I'm going to make that throat offset I on an instance basis. And what I'm going to do is build a formula. So I'm going to say in this case that throat E is going to be equal to half the host thickness. And I'm also going to add on to that my offset. And then I'm going to do the same, but I'm going to make it plus offset I for the other side. And now when I change these parameters, they'll push the frame. But at the moment you can see it's just hugging the wall. Let's change throat offset E to say 50. I can see now I have full control over the setout of my frame. Now later on I am actually going to have to place some hinges against the wall. So what I'm going to do in this case is create a reference plane here, because my hinges are going to go in this corner. And I'm actually going to need to parametrically constrain the depth of my trim as well. I'm going to make these not a reference, just because I don't want them to be dimension 2. And then also just going to create one reference plane back by the leaf thickness. In this case, we just need to make the leaf thickness 40, which we have, great. And in this case, we're going to make one dimension here, and I'm going to make this maybe 1 to 5 so we can really see what we're doing. And I'm just going to add another parameter there. For now, I might just lock that to 12, but I'm going to make this the leaf thickness. That way, as we push this away from the wall, it's going to pull our door leaf with it as well. For now, I'm just going to probably make this equal to 0 so that we can push it back onto the wall. And then all we need to do in this case is we do need to associate a parameter to this back to the reference plane of the wall. And this is going to be our external throat offset. And this will keep everything under control. There we go. Sometimes I like to put these parameters that are controlled by formulas under other so that you don't see them. It sort of keeps them out of the way. Makes things a little bit easier. That way it's more about the type parameters that the user can change here and the instance parameters as well. Okay, so at this point we pretty much have our frame set up and complete. So I'll just probably orientate my thumbnail, make it look a bit nicer. I'm going to go to VG and just turn off the wall so that I can really see what I'm looking at. And at the moment, I've really just built a frame to support a door. So under the type properties, I'm just going to call this d.sgl for single door. And I'm just going to call it 920 by 2040. And this is going to be my door family that I'm going to work with in future tutorials. Again, I can just purge, and I might actually just go and make sure I've got rid of all these materials. really clean up this family before I finish. And I'll just save as, and I'll save this family to doors for next time. I'm just going to call this bg underscore door underscore swing single. And I will upload this to my GitHub so that you have access to this family if you didn't manage to build the whole thing. What I'm going to do is just load this into the project just to show it in use. So I'll just create a wall and I'll place one of these doors, and you can see that the door frame meets the thickness of the wall. So if my wall changes thickness, my frame updates. And likewise, if I push my throat offset, you can see that I have full control over the depth of my door frame from the face of the wall. But as well as that, I can change my door frame. So if I go back into my door, I think I purged out my single frame type. So it's important, you do need to keep these family types inside here because they're not sheds, they exist at the family level. So I'm going to overwrite that family again, and now it should have a single frame in there as well. So now I can swap it to single rebate. And you can use this to pretty much build a catalog of door frames built into the door itself. You could also make the door frame shared if you wanted it to belong to the project and be schedulable. It's perfectly up to you. And of course, because I've given this an object style as well, if I go to visibility graphics, door, frame, and I say turn off frame, well, now we have full control over our door frame as well, even though it's a nested, non-shared family. So hopefully this has given you some techniques you can use in setting up the basic frame for a Revit door. And it's also taught you about label parameters and also how you can work with nested families and profiles to set up a fairly intelligent system to get started with a door. So in the next part, we'll have a look at how we can set up some angled hinges, which is going to be a little bit more detailed and show you another technique about constraining. This door will be available as well as the presentation on my GitHub. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. I know it was quite detailed and probably quite long, but hopefully this gives you some new techniques you can apply in Revit families. I look forward to seeing you in future tutorials. If you're not already following and subscribing, feel free to do so. And I'll see you in part 2 where we'll look at hinges. Thanks. Take care. Bye.